The moving truck was already halfway full when I got the call. My neighbour Ed, 71 years old, with a voice like gravel scraped across glass, said 6 words that made my chest tighten. "Ren, they're taking everything out." I broke at least 6 traffic rules racing back home, and there on the porch I rebuilt with my own 2 hands stood my father, smiling, holding a manila folder, like a man who had just signed papers on a beach condo. "We sold it," he said. "Marcus owes $87,000. You're being selfish." He said it the same way you'd say pass the salt. Calm, certain, finished. But here's the thing about my dad. He spent 3 full weeks planning how to sell my house. 3 weeks. And in all that careful plotting, he forgot to check one small detail at the county clerk's office. That one detail changed everything. Before I continue, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly connects with you. Drop your location and your local time in the comments. I'm Ren. I'm 34. I restore old houses for a living. Now let me take you back to a Tuesday afternoon in October, the day I almost lost everything I had worked for. 3 years ago, I bought the ugliest house in Mill Haven, Virginia for $47,000 at a county auction. No one else even placed a bid. The listing agent actually laughed when I lifted my paddle. 12 years empty. The roof half fallen in on the east side. 4 layers of damp, mouldy carpet covering original oak floors that hadn't seen daylight since the Reagan years. Everyone in town called it the ghost house. I saw something different. I saw structure. Strong bones, solid framing under the damage. Heart pine joists that only needed air and care. A wraparound porch with hand-turned balusters hidden under cheap vinyl siding. And in the basement, wrapped in a paint-stained tarp, I found her. A stained glass transom that once sat above the front door, broken into more than 40 pieces. Amber, cobalt, emerald. Someone had carefully saved it years ago and then forgotten it. I didn't forget. I spent 6 months at my kitchen table with a soldering iron, a jeweler's loop, and more patience than I knew I owned. Piece by piece, shard by shard, until the light could shine through whole again. That transom became the heart of the house. I mounted it above the restored front door, and every morning the sunlight rose through coloured glass across the entryway floor like a small private cathedral. 3 years, $62,000 of my own savings, every weekend, every vacation day. I knocked down walls, replaced 16 rotted studs, carefully scraped the oak floors by hand, rewired the kitchen myself after getting licensed. My hands carry the scars to prove it. And the Heritage Home Tour, Mill Haven's yearly showcase of the town's best restorations, had chosen my house as this year's featured property. The brochure was already printed, my house on the cover. What I didn't know was that while I was fitting the final piece of crown moulding in the parlour, my father was fitting the final piece of a very different design. Let me explain the Archer family. My father, Gerald, 62, retired post office manager, the type of man who speaks slowly, because he believes every word deserves attention. He ran our home like a small office branch, schedules on the refrigerator, chores assigned for maximum efficiency, opinions delivered as official decisions. You didn't debate with Gerald Archer. You received his verdicts. My mother, Diane, 59, a woman who mastered the skill of crying at exactly the right second. Not manipulative, I used to tell myself. Just emotional. I was wrong about that. And Marcus, my younger brother, 28, charming the way a weather vane is charming. Always turning whichever direction the wind blows, handsome grin. Expensive tastes, no follow through. Gerald paid off Marcus's credit cards 3 separate times, bought him a truck, covered 6 months of rent when Marcus quit his warehouse job because the manager disrespected him. Every time Marcus fell, Gerald caught him. Every time I climbed higher, Gerald looked somewhere else. When I bought the ghost house, I made the mistake of telling my father during Sunday dinner. He placed his fork down slowly and looked at me the way you look at a child about to touch a hot stove. $47,000, he said. That could have helped your brother. It's my money, Dad. Family money is family money, Ren. I stopped arguing after that. You don't win arguments with Gerald. You just stop trying. He never once visited the house. Not when I replaced the roof. Not when I stripped 4 layers of paint from the staircase. Not when the Heritage Tour Committee came to take photographs. But Marcus started calling 2 weeks ago, asking how I was, when I would be home, if I had any travel planned. I thought he was finally trying to build a relationship. Now I know he was building a timetable. Tuesday, October 15th, 2:13 p.m. I was 40 minutes away in Briarfield, sanding window frames for a client's 1920s craftsman bungalow, dust mask on, radio playing softly, phone buzzing in my back pocket. I almost ignored it. Ed Mulvaney, my next-door neighbour, retired plumber who helped me sweat copper pipe the first winter I owned the house. Ed didn't call unless something was wrong. "Ren, I don't want to alarm you." His voice was trembling. Ed Mulvaney, a man who crawled under houses with active gas leaks for 4 decades, was trembling. "There's a moving truck at your place. Big one. 2 guys are carrying out your furniture." My hands froze. Sawdust floated in the sunlight. "What?" "Your dad is here. He's telling them what goes and what stays." I said something. I don't remember what. I remember ripping off my dust mask. I remember turning the ignition. I remember the county road blurring through the windshield like watercolour paint in rain. 40 minutes. I made it in 26. The truck was huge. White. No company logo. Just a phone number sprayed on the cab door. Its back gate hung open like a wide jaw. Inside I saw my dining table, my floor lamp, the bookshelf I built from reclaimed barnwood. 2 men in gloves carried out a rolled rug. My rug. The Turkish kilim I found at a Staunton estate sale. And there on the porch, my porch, the one I rebuilt with salvaged heart pine and hand-forged nails, stood my father. Manila folder in his left hand, cell phone in his right, calm as a man checking his mailbox. Marcus sat in Gerald's sedan parked at the curb, head down, scrolling on his phone. My father looked up, saw me, and didn't flinch. Didn't step back. He smiled. That's when I understood this wasn't confusion. This was intention. I climbed those porch steps on legs that felt foreign. Gerald opened the folder, pulled out a stapled document, and held it toward me like a teacher handing back a graded exam. "Here, look. It's already finished. I sold the house. Buyer paid $195. Cash closing." Friday. The words didn't make sense at first. Or they did, and my mind rejected them like something poisonous. "You sold my house. I had power of attorney. It's legal." He said it without blinking. The same steady tone he used to announce dinner was ready at 6:30. Marcus owes $87,000, Ren, to people who don't send friendly reminders. They came to our house, to my front door. The screen door creaked and my mother stepped out. Diane had clearly been inside for hours. She wore her soft house shoes with the worn heels. She had been overseeing everything. Ren, honey. The tears were already sliding down her face, perfectly timed. Marcus could have been killed. Those men came to your father's house. They threatened him. Did anyone think to call me? Gerald's jaw tightened slightly. You would have said no, so we didn't ask. I did what any father would do. I looked at the contract. Gerald's signature on the seller line. My name typed above it with, by Gerald Archer. Attorney in fact printed underneath. He had used the power of attorney I signed 2 years ago when I was in the hospital after a scaffolding accident. A document I signed with a fractured collarbone and a morphine drip because my father stood beside my bed and said it was only for emergencies. He had kept that paper for 2 years, waiting for the right crisis or the right excuse. You planned this. My voice stayed steady. I needed it steady. Gerald closed the folder. I saved this family. I walked past him into the house. The living room was empty. The floor showed pale outlines where furniture had stood for years. Shadow shapes, ghost marks of a life being packed up. The kitchen stripped bare. The handmade butcher block island I built from a fallen walnut tree was gone, loaded onto a truck like freight. I went to the front entry and looked up. The transom was missing. I ran to the garage. There it was. My stained glass transom. The one I spent 6 months repairing from 43 shattered pieces. It lay on a moving blanket on the garage floor, wrapped in newspaper like leftovers after a family dinner. A strip of blue painter's tape across it read, "Fragile, included with house." I knelt down and slowly peeled back the newspaper. The glass caught the late afternoon light even there in the dim garage. Amber, cobalt, emerald, whole again because I refused to let it stay broken. My reflection stared back at me in fractured colour. For a second I felt something close to panic rising in my throat. Not because of the money, not because of the truck, but because they truly believed this belonged to them to trade away. Behind me I heard footsteps on the gravel, Gerald clearing his throat. "Ren, don't make this harder than it has to be. The papers are signed." I kept my hands on the frame of the transom. The solder lines I laid one by one, the tiny imperfections only I could see. "You forgot something," I said quietly. There was a pause, a small one, the kind that only happens when certainty cracks just a little. "What are you talking about?" I stood up slowly, brushing dust from my knees. "You spent 3 weeks arranging a buyer. You hired movers. You timed it for when I was out of town. You brought the contract. You used the power of attorney. But you forgot to check one small detail at the county clerk's office." Gerald's eyes narrowed just slightly. For the first time that afternoon, he looked unsure, and that was when everything began to change. The cobalt panel had a thin new crack running across it, a faint fracture from rough handling, 6 months of effort, a crack that could never be erased. My hands were trembling, not because I was scared. I carried it out to the porch and placed it carefully on the railing. Gerald stood there with his arms folded tight. "That's part of the house," he said. "The buyer gets everything." I looked at my father, truly looked at him. 62 years old, grey at his temples, standing straight like a man who had never once questioned his own authority. And I understood something that hurt more than the split in the glass. He didn't see my work. He didn't see the years. He saw numbers. He saw a deal. "You didn't just sell a house, Dad." I kept my voice steady and calm. "You sold 3 years of my life, and you didn't even ask me." Gerald let out a slow breath through his nose. "When you stop being dramatic, you'll understand I did you a favour." Something moved inside me. Not anger, not loud rage. Something colder, something sharp and clear. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I walked off the porch, sat inside my truck, and did what I always do before tearing something down. I studied the damage. The house was worth $310,000 after restoration. Gerald sold it for $195,000. That was $115,000 under market value. A rushed, desperate price. Get it done before she gets back. Deal. The $62,000 I had invested in materials vanished in a second. 3 full years of labour gone. The Heritage Home Tour next Sunday gone if the sale went through. And my professional name on the line. I am a restoration specialist. That house was my showcase project. The one printed on the Heritage Tour brochure. The property clients pointed to and said, "I want that." It had just been sold from under me. When clients hear news like that, they don't ask for explanations. They quietly hire someone else. If I stayed silent, I would lose the house. I would lose the money. I would lose the reputation I had built over 10 long years of honest work. And Marcus would learn, once again, that someone else would always pay the price for him. I picked up my phone. I scrolled past Dad, past Mom, past Marcus. I stopped on Janet Holloway, real estate attorney, the woman who prepared my deed. The woman who 2 years ago, when I found out Gerald had quietly taken $4,000 from our shared emergency account without telling me, sat me down in her office and said 5 words I never forgot. Revoke the power of attorney. I did it that same week. Filed the revocation with the county clerk. Notarized, stamped, recorded, finished. Gerald never knew because Gerald never asked. And Gerald always assumed that whatever paper he had in his drawer was still valid. I pressed call. Janet answered on the second ring. "Janet, my father just used the old POA to sell my house." There was a short pause. "Then the one we revoked?" "Yes." "Ren, that document is dead." Her voice changed into the sharp, exact tone she used when she was already thinking 3 moves ahead. "Has the deed transferred yet?" "I don't think so. He said closing is Friday." "Good. That gives us 2 days." I could hear her opening a file. "The revocation is recorded at the county clerk's office. Patty Voss processed it herself. Any contract Gerald signed using that POA is void. Completely void. He showed the buyer a copy of the original POA. The original does not matter. A revocation overrides it the moment it is filed. He would know that if he had checked the public record. She paused. He didn't check, did he? No, of course not. Janet let out a breath. Ren, I will file an emergency motion first thing tomorrow to freeze the deed transfer. The title company cannot close without clear authority. Once I flag the revocation, the sale is finished. Relief washed over me like a wave, but it carried something heavier with it. Janet, what he did, using a revoked POA to sign a contract. That is fraud, she said quietly. At minimum, it is fraud. In Virginia, that is a felony. And depending on the paperwork, there could be forgery charges as well. I stared at the steering wheel. A long-legged spider crawled slowly across the windshield. I told you 2 years ago, Janet said more softly. When someone misuses a power of attorney, it almost never happens just once. She was right. The $4,000 from the emergency account was practice. This was the real show. I don't want him in prison, Janet. That decision is yours, but the legal options exist either way. I nodded, even though she could not see me. Just freeze the sale. I will figure out the rest. The paper he is waving around, Janet added before ending the call, has the same legal value as a grocery list. That night I stayed at Ed's house. He did not ask questions. He simply pointed to the guest room, placed a clean towel on the bed, and warmed leftover beef stew on the stove. Ed Mulaney understood that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is stay quiet. At 8:40 my phone rang. Gerald. His voice sounded calm, the calm before a sermon, the voice I grew up fearing, controlled, reasonable. The voice of a man who believes he is obviously right and that disagreement is only confusion. Ren, I know you are upset, but think about what happens if you fight this. I am listening. The men Marcus O's gave him until the end of the month. If this sale falls apart, they come back. Not to my door this time, to his. Is that what you want? Your brother in a hospital bed? I said nothing. The buyer already paid a deposit, $20,000. Do you want to be the one who explains why the deal collapsed? Silence again. People in this town know me, Ren. They know our family. If you make this public, you will look bad. A daughter who would rather keep a building than protect her own brother. I let the quiet stretch between us. Then I said, I will do what I need to do, Dad. He hung up without saying goodbye. 11 minutes later, Diane called. She was crying, of course. Your father has not slept in 3 days. The stress is hurting him. His blood pressure is high, Ren. If something happens to him... Mum, did you know about this before today? A sniff. A pause. 1 second too long. I just found out. She was inside the house wearing her slippers. She had been there for hours. Good night, Mom. My mother called me heartless. My father called me selfish. But neither of them called to ask if I was all right. Marcus showed up at Ed's house at 7:15 the next morning. He looked awful. Dark circles under his eyes like bruises. 3-day stubble. A wrinkled shirt he had clearly slept in. He stood on Ed's porch with his hands pushed deep into his pockets, shoulders bent forward, looking like the same little brother who used to cry when he broke something and needed his big sister to fix it. Ren, can we talk? Ed stood in the kitchen doorway. I nodded to him. He stepped back but left the door open. Marcus sat on the porch swing and avoided my eyes. I'm in serious trouble. These guys told me if I don't have the money by the 31st, they will... He stopped, swallowed hard, leaving the threat hanging in the air so I would imagine the worst ending. I know I messed up. I know that. But Dad was only trying to help by selling your house. He didn't know what else to do. He could have called me Marcus. Marcus rubbed his face with both hands. If you block this sale, I don't know what happens to me. I studied him carefully. The shaking in his hands was real. The fear was real. But so was the script. I had watched Gerald coach people at dinner tables my entire life. Did you know Dad was going to use my house? His eyes moved to the right, down, anywhere but toward me. Silence. That was my answer. You knew and you didn't warn me. I thought you would understand. You always figure things out. There it was, the family rule. Ren will figure it out. Ren can handle it. Ren does not need help because Ren always lands on her feet. So take away her ground. How long did Dad plan this? Marcus hesitated. A few weeks. He called the buyer about 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. Not 5 days. 3 full weeks of planning behind my back. Go home, Marcus. He left without turning around. Just like Gerald always does. Wednesday morning my phone rang again. Ren, it's Linda. Linda Fessler, chair of the Heritage Home Tour Committee. She sounded like a woman powered by coffee and clipboards. Just checking in. The brochures came back from the printer. They look beautiful. Your house looks amazing on the cover. Mayor Hadley confirmed for the ribbon cutting. We have 42 people registered already. I held the phone tighter than I meant to. That's wonderful, Linda. I am stopping by Friday to do a final walkthrough with the photographer. I want photos of that transom in the morning light. The way you describe the sunrise shining through the glass, that is the picture. That is the one that goes in the county paper. I closed my eyes. If Gerald's sale closed Friday, there would be no walkthrough, no transom photo, no ribbon cutting. The featured heritage property would belong to a buyer who would probably tear out the interior and flip it into condos. Friday works, I said, because by Friday, one way or another, I would have an answer. After I ended the call, I opened the brochure-proof Linda emailed last week. Full colour, glossy paper, the house glowing in golden evening light, porch columns casting long shadows, the transom shining like stained fire above the front door. I stared at the image for a long time. 3 years of scraping old paint. 3 years of matching original trim. 3 years of tracking down reclaimed oak, antique hinges, period-correct nails. I remembered the winter nights when my fingers went numb sanding window frames. I remembered the spring mornings when neighbours slowed their cars just to watch the progress. I remembered the first time the cobalt glass arrived, wrapped in layers of foam, the exact shade I had searched 6 months to find. I remembered holding it up to the sunlight and feeling like I had finally restored something that mattered. Gerald saw a quick sale. I saw legacy. He saw a way to cover Marcus's debt. I saw a future project portfolio, referrals, stability. By Thursday afternoon, Janet called back. The motion is filed. The title company has been notified. They cannot close while this is under review. Gerald will receive formal notice by courier. Thank you, I said quietly. Be prepared, she added. He will not like this. He may try to pressure you again. He may try to intimidate the buyer into pushing forward. But legally, he has no standing. The revocation stands. I thanked her again and ended the call. I sat very still in Ed's guest room and let the silence settle around me. I was not shaking anymore. The cold clarity was still there. At 5:12 p.m., Gerald called. I did not answer. He left a voicemail. His calm voice was gone. This is unnecessary, Ren. You are embarrassing this family. Call me back before you make a mistake you cannot undo. I deleted the message. At 6:03 p.m., Diane texted, Please fix this. At 6:47 p.m., Marcus sent one line. I hope you know what you're doing. Yes. For the first time in a long time I did. I was not fixing it for them. I was fixing it for me. The house was still mine. The deed had not transferred. The crack in the cobalt glass could be repaired. It would take patience. It would take steady hands, but it was not beyond saving. And neither, maybe, was I. Below the photo in graceful serif font, From Ruin to Revival, the Archer House Restoration, Ren Archer, restoration expert, featured property. 23rd Yearly Mill Haven Heritage Home Tour. 3 years of my life pressed into one shiny magazine page. In 6 days, 42 people would step through that front door. The question was simple and frightening. Whose front door would it be? Wednesday night. Ed and I sat on his porch. October darkness comes early in the Shenandoah Valley. By 7, the streetlights were glowing and moths circled the bulbs. Ed handed me a cup of coffee. Then he passed me his phone. Photos, dozens of them. The moving truck license plate clear as day. The 2 workers lifting my dining table. A time-stamped picture of Gerald standing on my porch, pointing toward the front door, giving directions like a job foreman. Old habit, Ed said. 40 years working as a plumber. You record everything, leaks, pipe conditions before and after. So when the truck showed up, I started taking pictures. I scrolled through them. He had even photographed the truck cab. No company name, just a phone number printed on the side. There's more, Ed said quietly. When your dad was on the porch, I heard him on the phone. He said, "Get it finished before Thursday. She's back on Friday." I stared at him. He knew your schedule, Ren. Exactly. The phone calls from Marcus 2 weeks earlier. How's work going? Any large projects coming up? When are you heading to Briarfield? I had answered every question like a fool handing a burglar the security code. One more thing, Ed added. Your dad made another call. I only caught part of it. He said the closing is Friday at the title company. Same day she gets back. By then it's done. Same day. He had planned it down to the hour. Closed the sale Friday morning. By the time I drove home Friday afternoon, the deed would be transferred, the money sent to clear Marcus's debt, and my house would belong to someone else. I called Janet and gave her the full timeline. Good, she said. I'll have the freeze filed before they open Friday morning. Ed took a sip of coffee. The buyer, Ray, I think that was his name, came by yesterday to measure the rooms. Seemed like a decent man. I don't think he understands what he walked into. I watched the moths throwing themselves against Ed's porch light. Some things cannot stop flying toward what burns them. Thursday morning, I walked to my mailbox. The box was empty. Not empty like no mail today. Empty like it had not received a single letter in 2 weeks. The small red flag was down. Dust lined the inside corners. I drove to the post office and asked the clerk, a young woman named Tasha, who I had gone to high school with, to check my mail forwarding status. She typed. Frowned. Typed again. It says here a forwarding request was filed 2 weeks ago. All your mail is being redirected to... She read the address. Gerald's house. Authorized by you. I didn't authorize that. Tasha turned the screen toward me. There was my name on a USPS change of address form. The signature looked close. Gerald had practiced, but the slant was wrong. I signed with a forward lean. This signature stood straight up and down. My father's handwriting pretending to be mine. That's not my signature, Tasha. Her eyes widened. I drove straight to Gerald's house. He wasn't home, but his mailbox was. It was full. I recognized the return addresses, the title company, the buyer's agent, a certified letter from the county assessor's office, 2 weeks of my mail, intercepted, hidden, every document that would have warned me, closing notices, title search results, buyer communication, all redirected to Gerald's kitchen table. He hadn't only sold my house. He had blinded me first. I photographed everything without touching it and called Janet. Ren. Her voice went very quiet. Unauthorized mail forwarding with a forged signature. That's federal. That's not county court. That's the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. I sat in my truck outside my father's house. The man who had managed that same post office for 30 years had used his knowledge of the system to forge my mail redirect. He knew exactly how the process worked. He knew no one would question paperwork submitted by a retired postal manager. My father had spent 3 weeks building a trap. What he did not know was that the one document he needed most, the power of attorney, had been dead for 2 years, and I was about to show him its death certificate. Let me step outside the story for a moment. In my view and in my experience, fathers do not forge their daughter's mail signature by accident. That USPS form, he practiced my handwriting. 30 years running that post office. He knew exactly which form to choose and how to submit it without raising suspicion. And Marcus calling me 2 weeks earlier asking about my schedule. That was not brotherly concern. That was information gathering. So here is what I want to know. Why do you think my father did not simply ask me for help? He had 3 full weeks. What was he so certain I would say? Tell me in the comments. Now here is where things moved from private to public. Thursday afternoon, I needed stain for a client project, so I stopped at Millhaven Hardware. Dennis Puert, the owner, a man who had sold me enough wood screws and sandpaper to rebuild half the county, stood behind the counter. He looked at me the way people look at someone who just received difficult medical news. A mix of sympathy and discomfort. Everything okay at home, Ren? My stomach tightened. Why? Your dad was in yesterday. Bought some packing tape. We got to talking. Dennis shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He said you're going through family trouble. Said Marcus is in a serious situation and you're not helping. What exactly did he say? Dennis would not meet my eyes. He said you would rather keep an old house than help your own brother who is in danger. His words, not mine. I left without buying the stain. I drove to the cafe on Main Street and ordered a coffee I did not want. 2 women I knew from the farmer's market were sitting near the window. When I walked in, one leaned toward the other and whispered. They both looked at me with careful expressions. News travels fast in a small town. Faster when someone feeds it. By the time I finished that untouched coffee, I understood what Gerald had done. He was not just selling my house quietly. He was building a story. A story where he was the desperate father trying to save his troubled son. A story where I was the cold daughter clinging to wood and brick instead of family. Sympathy is a powerful tool in a place like Millhaven. That evening I drove back to my house. Archer House. The place I had poured 3 years of sweat and savings into. The porch boards I had replaced one by one. The original windows I had restored instead of replacing. The crown moulding I had stripped carefully, layer after layer of old paint, to bring back its detail. Every room held hours of work, every wall held a memory, and somewhere in town, my father was telling people I cared more about lumber than blood. I walked up the front steps and unlocked the door. Inside, the late light fell across the hardwood floors I had refinished myself. Golden, warm, honest. Whose front door would it be in 6 days? Not his. Friday morning was approaching like a storm you can see forming, but cannot stop. I called Janet again and confirmed everything. The freeze would be filed at the title company before they opened. Any attempt to close would trigger a halt. Any transfer attempt would be blocked. But the mail fraud, that was bigger. I sat at my kitchen table and laid out the printed copies of the forged change of address form, the comparison of signatures, mine and the one he submitted, the photographs Ed had taken, the timeline of calls from Marcus. Piece by piece, the picture sharpened. This was not panic. This was planning. 3 weeks of planning. He had arranged the moving truck, filed the mail forwarding, scheduled the closing, spread the story around town, timed it all for the one window when I would be away. Get it done before Thursday. She's back on Friday. He knew exactly when I would return. He just did not expect me to look inside my mailbox before Friday, or for Ed to document everything out of habit, or for the power of attorney to no longer exist. I drove once more past Gerald's house that night. Lights on inside, curtains drawn. From the outside, it looked peaceful. Ordinary, like any other house on a quiet October evening. But inside was 2 weeks of my stolen mail sitting somewhere on a table. Inside was a man who believed he could decide what belonged to me. The street was silent except for the hum of crickets. I thought about the Heritage Home Tour. 42 strangers walking through Archer House, admiring the craftsmanship, reading the small placard beneath my photo. From ruin to revival, they would see the restored staircase, the rebuilt fireplace mantel, the reclaimed heart pine floors. They would not see the legal freeze filed at dawn. They would not see the federal complaint forming in a folder on my desk. They would not see the daughter preparing to stand against her own father. But by Friday morning, things would no longer be quiet. By Friday morning, the trap he built would begin to close on him instead, and the front door he tried to take from me would still be mine. He was sure no one would question a document from a retired postal manager. My father had spent 3 full weeks setting up a trap. What he did not realize was that the one piece he needed most, the power of attorney, had been dead for 2 years, and I was about to place the death certificate right in front of him. I need to step out of the story for a moment. In my opinion, and from what I have seen in my life, fathers do not forge their daughter's mail signature by mistake. That USPS form was not random. He practiced copying my handwriting. 30 years running that post office. He knew exactly which form to choose and how to submit it without raising any suspicion. And Marcus calling me 2 weeks earlier, casually asking about my schedule? That was not brotherly concern. That was recon work. So here is what I want to know. Why do you think my father did not simply ask me for help? He had 3 full weeks. What answer was he so certain I would give? Think about it. Now here is where everything became public. Thursday afternoon, I needed stain for a client project, so I stopped at Millhaven Hardware. Dennis Pewitt, the owner, a man who had sold me enough wood screws to build another house, was standing behind the counter. He looked at me the way people look at someone who just received bad medical news. Sympathy mixed with discomfort. "Everything okay at home, Ren?" My stomach sank. "Why would you ask that?" "Your dad was in yesterday. Bought some packing tape. We talked for a bit." Dennis shifted his feet. "Said you are going through some family issues. Said Marcus is in a rough spot and you are not helping." "What exactly did he tell you?" Dennis would not look directly at me. "He said you would rather keep an old house than help your own brother who is in danger." His exact words. I drove to the cafe on Main Street and ordered a coffee I did not even want. 2 women I knew from the farmer's market were sitting near the window. When I walked in, one leaned toward the other and whispered. I did not need to hear the words to understand. The story had already travelled. My father had started laying the ground weeks ago. He was building pressure from every direction. Later that day, standing on my own porch, I held up the paper. This is a revocation of power of attorney filed with the county clerk's office 2 years ago. It is recorded, stamped, and notarized. The power of attorney my father used to sign that contract was revoked before he ever contacted Mr. Colton. Any document he signed using it is legally void. The porch went completely silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like it presses down on your shoulders. Gerald's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. That is not possible. I checked. You checked the copy in your desk drawer, Dad. I kept my voice steady and calm. You did not check the county records. They are public. Anyone can look them up. The colour drained from his face slowly. First the confidence disappeared, then the calm mask, then something deeper. The slow realization that the solid ground he believed he was standing on was never solid at all. Ray Colton looked down at the contract in his hands, then back at Gerald. His jaw tightened. You told me this was legitimate. Linda Fessler stood only a few feet away, her hand covering her mouth. Ed leaned against his porch railing, his coffee untouched, just watching. Diane's tears stopped, not because she decided to stop crying, but because the atmosphere changed so completely that even acting could not keep up with reality. Gerald turned to Diane as if she could save him. She had nothing to give. For the first time I could remember, my mother looked at my father and did not rush to defend him. I did not need to raise my voice. The document spoke loudly enough for me. Ray Colton was not a patient man. He had driven 40 minutes from the next county. He had paid a $20,000 deposit. He had arranged a closing date, hired a contractor for renovations, and told his wife they were getting a Victorian at a steal. Now he was staring at Gerald Archer like a man who had bitten into a beautiful apple and found it rotten all the way through. You told me she agreed to this. Ray's voice was low and controlled, which was worse than shouting. You told me the power of attorney was valid. I gave you $20,000 based on your word. Gerald lifted both hands slightly. The revocation can be challenged. There are legal paths. It cannot. A new voice cut through the air, sharp and clear. Janet Holloway walked up the driveway. Navy blazer, leather portfolio in her hand. I had called her at 7:30 that morning. She had driven straight from her office. The revocation was filed, recorded, and is irrevocable under Virginia Code Section 64.2/1612. Mr. Colton, I strongly advise you to speak with your own attorney about recovering your deposit. She paused and looked directly at Gerald. From Mr. Archer. Ray stared at the contract again, then at Gerald. The anger on his face changed into something colder. Contempt. You owe me $20,000. He folded the contract carefully, slid it into his jacket pocket, walked to his truck, and slammed the door. Then he drove away. Gerald stood on my porch, holding a useless contract for a dead deal, watching the last person on his side disappear down the street. Diane reached for his arm. Gerald, what do we do now? He did not answer. For the first time in 62 years, Gerald Archer had no rule to announce, no schedule to control, no final decision to deliver. Linda Fessler saw everything. I noticed her take a slow breath and really look at me. And in her eyes there was something new, understanding. Soon everyone left except Gerald, Diane, and me. Janet waited in her car with the engine running, giving me room to finish this. Gerald turned toward me. His voice shifted. The authority was gone. In its place was something that almost sounded like pleading, but it was calculated. Gerald Archer did not beg. He reorganized. Wren, listen carefully. The men Marcus owes money to will come back. The payment was supposed to be in their hands by the 31st. If this sale does not happen, they will hurt your brother. You understand that? He is your blood. You had 3 weeks to call me. 3 weeks to sit me down and say Marcus is in trouble. Instead, you tried to take my house. I did not take it. I was protecting this family. You were protecting Marcus. You were willing to sacrifice me. There is a difference, Dad. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment the old Gerald returned, the man who did not lose arguments because he refused to admit defeat. Fine, his voice turned flat and cold. When something happens to your brother, that will be on you, he pointed directly at me. In front of Ed's porch, in front of Linda standing near her mailbox, in front of Janet watching through her rearview mirror. That blood will be on your hands. I did not move. No, Dad. It is on the person who gambled away $87,000, and it is on the person who committed fraud instead of picking up the phone and speaking honestly to his daughter. Gerald stared at me. I held his stare. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Then something happened that I had never seen before in my entire life. My father looked away first. Diane placed her hand softly on his elbow. Let's go, Gerald. Her voice was quiet now. Not dramatic, not for show, just tired. They walked slowly to the car. Gerald's step seemed heavier than I remembered. Diane did not turn around. I repeated the words calmly, making sure everyone still within earshot understood. This is a revocation of power of attorney filed with the county clerk's office 2 years ago, recorded, stamped, and notarized. The power of attorney my father used to sign that contract was revoked before he ever contacted Mr. Colton. Any document he signed using it is legally void. Again, the porch fell into that heavy silence. Gerald's mouth moved, but no strong argument came out. That is not possible. I checked. You checked the copy in your drawer, Dad. You did not check the official county records. They are public information. Anyone can search them. The colour drained from his face again as the truth settled deeper. First his confidence faded, then his calm expression broke. Then came the slow understanding that the control he believed he had was only an illusion. Ray Colton had already driven away, but his anger still hung in the air like smoke. Linda stood frozen. Ed still leaned on his railing, coffee cold in his hand. Diane's tears had completely stopped now. Not because she decided to stop crying, but because reality had stepped in and pushed performance aside. For the first time in my memory, my mother did not step in front of my father to soften the impact. She did not explain. She did not defend. She simply stood there, watching the structure he built collapse on its own weight. I did not need to shout. I did not need to argue. The official document did all of that for me. Ray Colton had driven 40 minutes. He had handed over $20,000. He had lined up contractors, planned renovations, and imagined a future in that house. And all of it had been based on my father's word, a word that no longer held power. Gerald had believed that his reputation, his years at the post office, and his confident voice would carry him through. But paper filed 2 years earlier had more strength than all of that. Janet stood firm beside me, calm and professional. The revocation was filed properly. It is final under Virginia law. Mr. Colton should speak to his attorney about getting his money back from Mr. Archer. Clear, direct, no emotion, just fact. Gerald Archer, who had controlled rooms his entire life, who had managed employees and policies and people, stood on my porch without control. The trap he spent 3 weeks building had closed on him instead. And this time, there was no form he could file, no signature he could copy, no quiet call he could make to undo it. She paused and looked straight at Gerald from Mr. Archer. Ray stared down at the contract in his hands. Then he lifted his eyes to Gerald, and what showed there was worse than anger. It was contempt. "You owe me $20,000. He folded the contract carefully, slid it into his jacket pocket, walked to his truck, climbed in, and slammed the door hard. Then he drove away. Gerald stood on my porch, holding a useless document from a dead deal, watching his last supporter disappear down the road. Diane reached for his arm. "Gerald, what do we do now?" He did not answer her. For the first time in 62 years, Gerald Archer had no policy to announce, no calendar to control, no final decision to hand down. Linda Fessler watched everything. I saw her take a slow breath and turn her eyes toward me. Really look at me. And in her eyes there was something that had not been there just minutes earlier. Understanding. Soon everyone had left except Gerald, Diane, and me. Janet was waiting in her car with the engine running, giving me space but staying close enough in case I needed her. Gerald turned toward me. His voice shifted. The command in it was gone, replaced by something softer. It almost sounded like pleading, but even that felt planned. Gerald Archer did not beg. He reorganized. "Ren, listen to me. Those men, the ones Marcus owes, they will come back. The money was supposed to be in their hands by the 31st. If this sale does not go through, they will hurt your brother. You understand that, don't you? He is your blood. You had 3 weeks to call me. 3 full weeks to sit me down and say, Marcus is in trouble. Instead, you took my house. I did not take it. I was protecting this family. You were protecting Marcus. You were sacrificing me. There is a difference, Dad." His eyes narrowed. The old Gerald came back for a second. The one who never lost an argument because he refused to let one happen. "Fine." His voice turned flat and cold. "When something happens to your brother, that will be on you." He pointed at me there on Ed's porch, in front of Linda, who was slowly pulling away from the curb, in front of Janet's rearview mirror. "That blood will be on your hands." I did not move. "No, Dad. It is on the person who gambled away $87,000, and it is on the person who chose fraud instead of picking up the phone and talking to his daughter." Gerald stared at me. I held his gaze. 5 seconds. 10. Then something happened that I had never seen before. My father looked away first. Diane placed her hand gently on his elbow. "Let's go, Gerald." Her voice was quiet, tired. They were not performing for anyone anymore. They walked toward their car. Gerald's steps were slower than I remembered them being. Diane did not turn around. After they left, I told the group what I truly believed, that nothing is too damaged to fix if you are willing to put in the work. They clapped. Real applause. 43 strangers who had no reason to care, choosing to care anyway. Later, Dennis found me in the parlor and shook my hand. I heard what really happened. "I am sorry I doubted you." Linda Fessler stood nearby with her clipboard and touched my arm lightly. "Your father told me a very different version of the story, Ren. I owe you an apology. I did not need the apology, but I will not pretend it did not matter. Let me step out of the story for just a moment. I want to be honest. Standing in that house during the tour, hearing those people clap, part of me wanted to cry. Not because I was joyful, because I kept thinking, my dad drove past this house for 3 years and never once walked inside. Yet 43 strangers stepped through that front door and understood what it meant. I am still trying to understand what that says about my family. But I have a question for you. Do you think Gerald ever truly looked at the house? I mean, really saw it? Now back to what happened after the tour. Monday morning, Janet's office. She explained everything clearly. The emergency freeze is active. The deed remains in your name. The title company has marked Gerald's transaction as invalid. Ray Colton has hired his own lawyer and filed a civil lawsuit against your father for the return of his $20,000 deposit plus attorney fees. I nodded slowly. On the criminal side, Ren, I need to be direct with you. Janet folded her hands on her desk. Using a revoked power of attorney to carry out a real estate sale is fraud under Virginia law. That is a Class 4 felony. It carries up to 10 years in prison. And the mail forwarding issue, forging a USPS change of address form, is a federal crime. Postal inspectors take that very seriously. I sat quietly with the weight of those words. My father, The retired post office manager, the man who wore a tie to work every day for 30 years, the man who organised the spice rack in alphabetical order, could end up in prison. What are my choices? You can press criminal charges and allow the legal system to move forward. Or you can decline to prosecute, and I will send Gerald a binding legal agreement. He will never use any document in your name again. He will have no direct contact with you except through legal counsel, and he will acknowledge the revocation in writing. I chose the second option. Janet looked at me for a long moment. You are being more generous than he deserves. I know, but he is still my father. I just cannot allow him to be my father at my expense anymore. 3 weeks later, Ray Colton won his civil case. Gerald was ordered by the court to return the $20,000 from his retirement savings. Diane called me that evening, crying, "Your father's retirement money is gone, Ren." I let her words hang in the silence for a second. So was my house mom. The loan sharks turned out to be easier to deal with than I had expected. The county sheriff's office traced the rental sedan to 2 men running an illegal lending operation out of Richmond. Ed's photographs, the license plate number, and the physical descriptions all matched an investigation the state had been building quietly for months. Our report was the final piece they needed. One of the men was arrested at a small motel in Westboro. The other fled south and disappeared. The deputy said they would track him down eventually.
If you like the video, then subscribe our YouTube channel for more videos.